My name is Catherine and I'm the founder of Candybox. We are revenue operations and go-to-market systems consultants, and we work primarily with small to mid-sized B2B tech and SaaS companies. As such, we've led dozens of CRM migrations and consolidations, and we know quite a bit about the topic. So without further ado, here are the talking points for today. First, we'll be looking at why migrations typically fail and why you should care about it to set the stage. Then I'll dive into the migration framework that we typically use for our engagements and follow up with a summary of our top tips for avoiding technical debt and business disruption. I did want to start with the end in mind so that we can contextualize the rest of the conversation. There are many good reasons why a company may want to consider CRM migration, even though typically it's costly and complex. They may have outgrown their current CRM, they may have new security or compliance concerns that require a more mature platform, they could be gearing up for a round of funding or an IPO, or have gone through a merger or acquisition and need to merge multiple orgs together. Given that there are so many good reasons for needing to migrate, why do these projects so often go off the rails? Well, in my experience, these are the top reasons. First is underinvestment, either in cost or time. The company may underestimate the complexity of the project, leading to a rush job and having to cut corners to meet deadlines or budget. Secondly, lack of clear objectives and scope. Done well, a migration is an opportunity to rethink how the business runs and build out new scalable processes and architecture. But without clarity in terms of what the company is trying to achieve, migration teams will often end up trying to be all things to all people, and this can lead to either over or under customization of the platform and a rather directionless CRM. Then you have poor change management and user enablement. The most beautifully built CRM in the world is useless if nobody uses it. And one of the top reasons we see for lack of adoption is because users simply were not involved in the migration planning and were kind of dropped into a new system overnight with little support, not the best initiation into a new system. We also have underestimating data quality and migration challenges. This is a big one. A CRM migration is a golden opportunity to clean up your data, whether that's stale data, incomplete records, duplicates, or otherwise. However, many companies neglect this part of the project and migrate data from multiple systems without considering the new data architecture or how to cleanse and normalize the data. This can lead to a poor data structure that doesn't make sense, is inconsistent, contains duplicate records, or simply doesn't allow the business to report on its key metrics that are so necessary for it to operate. We also often see a lack of key stakeholder involvement. CRM migration projects are clearly very technical, but they are not simply technical projects. A lot of it is about the people that you're going to be supporting. So what happens if you leave out key stakeholders? They might feel that your new CRM is not tailored to their needs and refuse to use it, or they might become involved partway through the project and throw off your scope and timing. Either way, not the best. Then finally, we've got inadequate testing. Not leaving enough time for thorough testing or performing incomplete testing can hugely set a migration project back. If your users' first experience of the CRM is bugs and errors, it will greatly hurt your adoption. So what is the main takeaway here? I'd say it's that most failures are avoidable with better planning and alignment. But here's the thing, why should you care about all of this? Well, as I was putting together this presentation, I came across this quote. The original says good architecture within the context of software engineering, but I think it applies to CRM migrations too. Sometimes I have encountered an attitude in these projects, occasionally from leadership, that so long as the migration actually happens and the company gets into the new CRM, it's basically a success, which, yes, it's better than being left without a CRM completely, but just barely. This attitude ignores many of the aspects and the impact of a badly managed migration. So if anybody asks you why we should invest time and upfront effort in your migration project, this is why. In a good migration, your outcome will mostly look like this. You will have clean and improved data that is accurate and consistent and ensures more reliable reporting for the business and a better user experience. You will have an improved customer experience. Unified and timely views of customer interactions are enabled, they are personalized, and allows for responsive service that builds trust and loyalty. You will also have a new CRM with architecture and infrastructure that is built to support growth and will be able to scale to handle increased users' data and workflows without breaking down. You'll also likely see a positive revenue impact. Things like streamlined processes, faster lead response times, and improved conversion tracking lead to higher customer lifetime value and sales efficiency. And you'll also see improved adoption and satisfaction. When teams find the system intuitive and aligned with their workflows, they'll be happier using it and more productive. Compare this to a poorly done migration, which will look more like this. You will have potentially corrupt, lost, or poor quality data with missing fields, missing records, duplicate records, inaccurate or missing data. This undermines decision-making, disrupts operations, and erodes trust in the system. You will often see a direct and negative customer experience. In a poor migration, handoffs between teams are often inefficient, follow-ups may get missed, incorrect marketing emails may get sent out, your customer success manager may not be able to find key information about the account, and there can be delays in support. I'm sure you can imagine this leads to frustration and potentially churn and reputational damage. In addition, you may end up with a system that cannot scale, whether that's due to technical debt or poor architectural decisions. An inflexible or poorly designed system becomes very, very costly to maintain and will inhibit your company's future growth. You may even see revenue losses. A bad migration can literally cause lost revenue, which can take the form of missed opportunities, slow lead follow-up, missing out on signals to expand an account or save it from churning. Then you may also see productivity losses or a drop in morale. If your reps are wasting hours trying to learn new systems that they weren't enabled for or weren't set up for their workflow, or they're struggling to find data, teams may become demotivated and eventually refuse to use the CRM. A smooth migration protects not just your data, but also your team's performance, your revenue, and your customers' trust. So yes, investing upfront in careful planning, stakeholder alignment, data cleansing, and change management does take time and effort. But in my opinion, it's a fraction of the cost of cleaning up a failed rollout. Right, so hopefully by this point, I've set the stage for why it matters to do your best to get your migration right from the beginning. That begs the question, how do we get it right? Broadly, it's about following a clear and structured roadmap. Successful migrations are methodical. Every migration is different, of course, depending on a variety of factors, but here is the framework that we tend to start with. First, you do your pre-migration planning in the discovery and audit phase. Here's where you define your objectives, get all your key stakeholders involved, see what the current versus future state is like, and so on. Following that, you move into design, where you translate everything you've discovered and defined in the discovery phase into a detailed project plan. Once that's complete and you have sign-off, you can start building out your features and testing them in phases. Simultaneously, you can start preparing your data for migration. This involves exporting, cleaning, transforming, mapping, and validating existing data that you'll be porting into your new CRM, as well as running trial data loads before the final imports. After testing, you have go live, which is the actual moment of truth when new users begin using the CRM. You may choose to provision users all at once or release team by team, but either way, you need a team on hand to deal with any questions or issues arise, as well as a rollback strategy in case of surprises. Finally, you have your post-migration phase, which is focused partially on user enablement and support, but also on measuring success metrics and incrementally improving your new CRM based on user feedback and business priorities. Now let's dive into each phase in more detail. Phase 1, discovery and audit. A lot of people say that planning is the most important phase because it's here that you determine what success actually looks like. How does one do that? Well, first, you'll want to make sure you get all key stakeholders involved early on. That's going to be executives who will champion and fund your project, leads from all of the teams who will be using the new CRM, as well as an actual migration team. One of the things you'll want to encourage alignment on early on are the objectives of the migration. Why are we doing this? What issues are we trying to solve? And what does success look like? With that complete, the migration team can begin conducting a thorough analysis of the current state of the CRM. What data do we have and what state is it in? Who's going to be using the CRM and what are their key activities? How are processes structured currently? What integrations do we have? Why do we have them? Who owns them? What's working well and where are their pain points, etc. The way that we get this information is usually three different approaches. Firstly is through discovery calls with leadership and individual reps, where we get deep insight into how they are currently going about their day-to-day work. Then we also independently will look under the hood at the current CRM to see how it's configured, what processes exist, and so on and so forth. And then finally, we will conduct business-focused calls, which are usually with leads or executives about the business's current and future goals. I sometimes see people skip the business context, but it is relevant. For example, if you find out that a company plans to have their sales team double or triple in the next 12 months, or maybe they're launching an entirely new line of products, that's really important to know because it will affect how you design things and it's relevant for how you'll be building out your new CRM. Essentially, once you have a clear picture of the current state and where the business is planning to go, you can start diving into the future state. This takes us to our next phase, which is design. Heading into the design phase, you should be equipped with all business and technical context needed to design your new architecture and also scope out your requirements to produce the actual project plan you'll be working off of. The main focuses of this phase are developing a clear architecture for the new CRM, developing clear and detailed requirements and user stories for everything you'll be building, communicating this vision to your stakeholders, and of course, obtaining consensus and sign-off on timeline, scope, and budget. In terms of planning, it is safe to assume that your plan may need to go through several iterations with your stakeholders, so make sure to plan in some wiggle room here timing-wise. My recommendation for what you should have to exit phase 2 is as follows. Documentation of future architecture and end-to-end business processes, which will include things like field, object, and automation mapping. Then an inventory of integrations and dependencies, a plan for how you are going to be conducting your data normalization, mapping, and transition. User stories for all of your key functionality. This may include things like security and compliance if that's relevant for you. A detailed project plan which includes timelines, dependencies. If you're working with consultants, this may also include a finalized SOW or statement of work with clear deliverables. And then you'll want also a change management and communication plan for the eventual go live. And all of this needs to be signed off on by your key stakeholders to continue. Once you've got through all that, you can move on to stage 3, which is build and test. Now you're ready to roll up your sleeves and dive into the actual build work. When you start your build work, the ideal workflow is to first build in some kind of developer sandbox. Then, if it exists for your CRM, a partial or full copy sandbox in which there is sample data, and then finally port into the production environment. Not all CRMs offer this, so your mileage may vary, but if you do have the option to work with a sandbox, I definitely recommend using it. When you're building, you'll want to focus on familiarizing yourself with best practices for the specific CRM that you are using and also any integrations that you're working with. This will help you to avoid errors and technical debt. And this doesn't just apply to code. Sometimes it even means the somewhat tedious work of doing things like including clear naming conventions for your custom fields, your automations, validation rules, for example, if you're using Salesforce, and also taking the extra time to add descriptions and update your technical documentation as you go. I know it can be tempting to build out the final finished version of everything before demoing it to your stakeholders, and you can do that. However, we would recommend to build out a basic functionality and demo it to your main stakeholder earlier on. That way, if they have any issues with the functionality or design, you will find out earlier and it gives you a better chance of being able to course correct. You'll sometimes come across people who try to significantly change what you agreed upon in the course of the project. In those instances, don't be afraid to say no if their feedback is not viable or will seriously derail the project. It can always be incorporated into a V2, and most people will be happy with that as long as you can give them some clarity in terms of timelines and priorities. In terms of testing, I'm sadly not a developer, so I won't go too deep into the technical side of things, but high level, here is what you want your testing to cover. If you're using code, you want to validate through unit testing and ensure a high level of code coverage. If you're using Salesforce, for example, and using Apex code, you need at least 75% code coverage. You'll want to make sure you're testing bulk, single, and edge case scenarios. If you're using more declarative automation, make sure that you use any tools that the CRM gives you out of the box to be able to test your flows. For example, again, in Salesforce, you have a tool called Flow Debug, which is super useful to test various use cases. Make sure to allot time to outlining your user acceptance testing scripts, and also that they cover positive, negative, bulk, and exception cases. And when you're doing your testing, I would definitely recommend documenting the results. I'd also recommend, if possible, to get users involved in your testing, or at a bare minimum, have a different person than yourself test your work. You will likely have blinkers on if you're testing the work you built yourself, whereas another person will behave more similarly to a real user out in the wildwood. They'll be more effective at breaking the beautiful system you've designed. Each time you encounter bugs, return to building and QA before sending the process back to UAT again. Rinse and repeat until you have no bugs left. Now, for those of you who might not be familiar with the different test scenarios I mentioned, here are some examples to give a bit more information. A positive test verifies that the system will behave as expected when provided with valid and expected input. A negative test checks how the system will handle invalid, unexpected, or malicious input. Then bulk tests assess how the system handles large volumes of data or repeated operations, and exception tests simulate unexpected disruptions or edge cases to see how the system will respond. As a bonus, unit tests in coding are tests that verify the correctness of units of the code, which are typically individual functions, methods, or classes, and that is done in isolation of the rest of the system. Okay, so you've built everything out and all the business logic works as intended in your target org. In addition to that, you should be checking to exit this phase that all unit and integration tests have passed. You'll want to make sure that the integrations have been built out as far as possible. There is a caveat here that some integrations are simply not possible to build out until you've got to production, or they will only allow for one CRM to be connected at a time. So if you're moving, say, from HubSpot to Salesforce, you may need to wait to go live before you disconnect your prior CRM and connect your new one. But you'll also want to make sure that user accepting has been passed. You will want to have completed tests for your data migration. More on this in 1 second. You'll want to make sure that everything is documented, that you have a plan ready for how you're going to go live and what that looks like, and that your stakeholders have signed off on all of the above. Now, I've listed this as phase 4, but realistically, this should be going on at the same time as build and test, which is why I mentioned it as an exit criteria on the previous slide. Data preparation and migration. One of the reasons that I'd recommend starting this as soon as possible and doing this in tandem with the other activities is firstly because it's complex. Depending on the data volumes, there may be a lot to get through. But also, ideally, you want your data files to be ready as soon as you've completed your technical build out so that you can start running test migrations, testing your processes against real data, and not waste extra time before being able to do that and then go live. So in the discovery and audit phase, you should have already completed a data audit of your legacy systems, and you should go in knowing things like, what data do we currently have? How is it being created right now, which could be manually by users through list uploads, enrichment, etc., etc. What quality state is it in, i.e. how good or bad is it? How will the new data architecture differ from the legacy architecture? What are parameters for importing the new data? And how will data integrity be maintained going forward? Your main goals here are to define a logical and scalable architecture for your data and to map your legacy data against this. That's going to be both at the object and at the field level. You'll want to determine what data sets you'll be importing. You will want to identify and fix any existing quality issues with your data, as well as addressing the root cause of said issue. You will want to create your migration files, back up any existing data, and run test imports and verify data quality. So let's start at the top, defining your data architecture and mapping legacy data against this. Now, depending on how different your original versus future CRM are, you may want to structure your data very differently. A really common example of this is if you move from HubSpot and into Salesforce, you will need to decide whether you want to use the lead object in Salesforce or just contacts. You can start to do this by analyzing the data model in both of the systems. That would include objects, fields, relationships between them, business rules, any dependencies or limitations. You can identify equivalent entities and assess where custom objects or fields might need to be created or transformed. Pay special attention to differences in how relationships may work between CRMs. For example, lookups or master detail relationships may be different, and automation capabilities may also be different. You may not be able to create an automation one-to-one in both platforms. I'd recommend using data mapping documents or schemas so that you can define source to target mappings and track required data transformations and ensure data integrity and functional parity in your new environment. Once you have that architecture in place, you will likely need your business stakeholders' help in determining what data sets to import. A good way of figuring this out is by looking at what each team reports on and across which time frame. Then, after you've decided what will be imported, you will want to move on to fixing data quality. In terms of data quality, what are some things you should be looking out for? First is duplicate records. You will want to deduplicate these. If you have incomplete records, you'll want to try to enrich them. If you have outdated or stale records, you will want to either enrich and update those or potentially archive them. If you notice a lack of standardization, you can standardize the values and put in mechanisms to maintain that going forward. I would prioritize for fields that are critical to the business. For example, if your company uses country and state values, for example, to do lead routing or territory planning, you'll definitely want to normalize these values and ensure that there are appropriate rules to validate the data and keep it cleansed and clean going forward. Once the data has been cleansed as far as possible and you've determined which data you'll be importing, you will need to back up all existing data, and then you will need to export everything that you plan to import from your source system. Here, every CRM is different, so make sure you look into this ahead of time and see if there are any specific tools you might need to get the data out and into a usable format. Some have limitations. Bear in mind that you will want your data files to be structured according to the order you'll be importing them and according to your new CRM's architecture, not the legacy system. In many cases, that can mean transforming the data significantly and doing things like moving fields from one object to another, merging records, or even changing the data type entirely. For this reason, it's a very good practice to run small test imports, ideally in a sandbox environment, and then spot check data accuracy before running full imports. Okay, it might be hard to kind of imagine what that would look like in practice. So here is an example, and I'm going to use the opportunity object in Salesforce as an example because it's relatively complex and has a lot of dependencies. So first you start with a field analysis. And here are some examples of things that you might look for. 1. In the original data, you notice that names are not standardized and they're just completely across the board. You can't tell anything about them looking at the name. You notice that the close date is often even in the past, even if the record was not closed. These are opportunities for automation, so you would note those down. Maybe you also notice that the opportunity source, which many businesses will report on to determine attribution, is a text field. That's an opportunity to change it to a pick list that has standard values. You may also notice there are fields that represent individual points of contact on the opportunity. And that could be a chance to move this over to opportunity contacts instead of having custom fields. You also notice that products are represented using drop-down fields or text fields. This could be an opportunity to use the opportunity products object. From here, you can move over to a record analysis, and this is more focused on the actual data and any patterns across it. So if you notice duplicates, you can merge them. There are loads of tools out there, for example, Cloud Dingo, OpenPrice. Many of these can help here, depending on what capabilities your CRM has to help reduce the number of duplicates. You'll also be looking at how many records there are so that you have an idea of the scope of the import and how much time you'll need to allot. And you'll be looking at which records we should be importing overall. Things that will affect this will be the age of the data, the completeness of the data, the level of engagement, etc., etc. For example, if your company used to have stage 0 opportunities, which tend to be opportunity records where you've never actually had a meeting or there's no real data or engagement beyond an original contact us request, that might be something your company just decides to leave in the past and archive to have cleaner data going forward. From here, you would be documenting how your legacy data is going to map to Salesforce's opportunity architecture. So you can see here, it's not just the opportunity that you may end up using. You may also use the related objects of opportunity products, team members, contact roles, and this might mean that you need to move fields that were originally on a single object in your source CRM to multiple different ones. Once you've done that, you'll be able to create your individual files, which will be object by object, and also document the order that you'll be migrating said files. Obviously, you start at the parent and then go down to the children. So in this case, it's going to be opportunities first, and then it's child objects. And finally, you want to make sure that you've created backups for everything because you don't want to go through all this effort and then lose data. This is honestly a fairly extensive part of the project for the majority of migrations, unless you get lucky. But to exit this phase, you want to make sure that you have completed whatever cleansing and normalization was identified. You have completed your test migrations, that you have defined who will be owning the data going forward, which could be records or fields. You'll want to make sure that you have in place a thoughtful architecture, that it simply makes sense for the business and how you do your reporting, that you have hygiene controls in place to keep the data quality at a certain standard, and that you have also cleansed any legacy data and not migrated it forward. That finally takes us to the moment of truth, which is go live. Once you've completed your build out, you've tested, you've migrated over and validated your data, you can get ready for go live. This phase is a lot about user enablement and expectation setting, as well as ensuring that you have support coverage and a plan for any issues that arise. So what should you keep in mind to ensure a successful go live? Firstly is timing. Ideally, you want to perform the migration during a low activity period, i.e. not right at the end of your sales quarter. If it's possible, I would strongly recommend performing some of the test migrations and the go live testing on a holiday or even a weekend. Losing a weekend is a small price to pay for having a smoother rollout, trust me. Then enablement is something you'll want to think about. Prior to go live, you'll want to have put together a thorough communication and training plans for users. We tend to be fans of blending training methods because everybody learns differently. So you could use a mix of live trainings, office hours, written documentation, and recordings such as Loom, for example. Where possible, have designated points of contact for each team to run the trainings so that they can act as your first escalation point for any questions that arise. Many organizations use a kind of train the trainer model or identify CRM champions in each department who can help their peers. Then support. Make sure that you will be available to your users throughout the first days and weeks of go live because this is when they will have the most questions. We tend to have good success with keeping designated support Slack channels, but if you don't use Slack, then it could be email, Teams, Jira, or otherwise. And we also like to have daily office hours when users can drop in and troubleshoot or ask questions. If users are based in different locations, please do keep in mind how you'll handle that global coverage. Then we've got bug and idea tracking. You will want to put in place a tracking system for bugs as well as feature requests. This can be as simple as a spreadsheet or more complex like Jira. But the main point is to capture user feedback and be able to action it. And then finally, I would recommend having some kind of monitoring setup. This is a system to tell you how things are going and help you identify that there may be issues brewing. User feedback is of course great, but it won't always tell you if something is going wrong. Here are some reports that you could consider. Login and usage reports. These tell you whether users are actively logging in and using the system. Record ownership reports. They can tell you if records are getting assigned to the correct people. Debug reports. These can help you monitor post-migration automation triggers. Activity monitoring. This allows you to see whether users are actually creating activities like they did before. And then finally, a KPI dashboard. This can help you to track things like record creation, error logs, user logins over time, and data completeness. Now, how will you know that you're moving out of go live and into more of a steady state? I would say this usually can take some weeks to some months, depending on the company and the complexity of the project in question. But these are some of the things you'll want to be seeing. You'll want to see relative stability of the system, no major bugs or outages over a period of, say, 2 to 4 weeks. If any critical issues came up during go live, all of these have been resolved. You'll like to see strong user adoption. People are using the platform. They seem to be responding positively. Data accuracy looks good. It may not be perfect, but you have the fundamentals in place. You have a handoff from the project team to the leads or individuals who will be handling the system day by day. And you'll also have an ongoing change management process in place so that you can continue to iterate and improve upon your CRM over time. Once you've got through the initial go live, this takes you through to post-go live support and iteration. You, of course, want to make sure that users thrive on the new system and that it's going to evolve as the business does. So to wrap up, what are some good ideas to ensure this? Well, first, definitely continue with ongoing training and enablement. It's not a one and done, especially for things like new hires or users getting promoted or switching roles. You will need to be continuously training and enabling them. If you have something like Slack or Teams channels for support, I strongly recommend continuing to man those so that users always feel like they have a place to go for support and quick answers. We've also seen great success with setting up a cadence of continuous delivery of features. This can help users to really feel heard, engaged, and excited about your CRM. Then, if possible, if you can automate the delivery of health check reports either daily or weekly, that can help you address any issues that are arising and keep data quality strong. Finally, I would recommend that you hold a retrospective. Maybe this is 30, 60, 90 days, 3 months, 6 months after the project went live, whatever makes sense for your use case. But here you can talk about how the project went, what went well, what you learned from it, and what the next priorities are going to be for your VP. So that's it. Obviously not simple, but hopefully quite logical. To wrap things up, I've got some top tips just to avoid technical debt and then to avoid business disruption. So here, talking about technical debt, how you run your migration project will determine a lot of whether you end up with a new and scalable or lots of budgeting technical debt. Here are some things you want to do or not do. First, just don't treat your migration as a recreation of everything in your legacy org. There's a reason that you're migrating from one platform to another. The migration is a really big opportunity for you to clean house. So don't just port across hundreds of fields or tons of data that just doesn't add value. And also consider whether everything that you've built up over time in your legacy CRM makes sense for your new CRM. Then keep it simple. You don't need to customize if there are out-of-the-box options for you. You don't need to use code if there are declarative automated features available. If there is a standard object that works, you don't need to add a custom one just because. Then it's not everybody's favorite activity, but do document everything, including why certain decisions were made. This includes very small things that can make a difference over time, like adding descriptions to custom objects, fields, reports, automations, and so on. Then do make sure to thoughtfully implement security and accessibility. A key example of this is avoid having dozens of admins randomly being able to create whatever they want in the CRM. It's a recipe for disaster over time. Then definitely do add naming conventions, whether this is how you name automations so you can tell what the use case is or where they operate, how you prefix custom fields. Using conventions will make ongoing maintenance easier and faster. Then definitely do implement governance if you can. These are processes where you regularly review and prune unused fields, reports, or code. Some platforms like Salesforce provide tools like Optimizer or Org Health Check, which scan your org for inefficiencies, so you can incorporate those into your maintenance routine post-migration. There are other paid tools such as Sonar that can be a great option if you have the budget. Otherwise, manual is definitely better than nothing. So then, how to avoid business disruption? It's my experience that how smoothly your migration goes depends a lot on how well you've done your planning. So some high-level tips. Involve your stakeholders early and often. These are the people you're building for, so their support, buy-in, and feedback are critical. Then, definitely invest the time upfront in creating as detailed a migration plan as possible. This is what you will fall back on whenever there's a dispute about who owns what was in scope or not, or what the dependencies were to do something. You will not regret making sure your plan is watertight. Then, start auditing, cleansing, preparing, and validating your data as early as possible. Do not underestimate how complex and time-consuming the data prep and migration process can be. If you start early, the worst case scenario is that you'll finish early. Then don't neglect involving end users as well as leadership. End users are the ones who will be actively using the systems. You want to make sure that they feel heard and what you're building actually makes sense for them. Then keep things as simple as possible. Although it's fun to push the limits, it's much easier to build a simple but solid V1 than try to go above and beyond by including all the bells and whistles. Then communicate early, clearly, and often. You might get sick of repeating yourself, but people have busy lives. So communicating where you're at, any blockers that you're having, the why behind the project, etc. will keep you top of mind. Then choose a sensible time for go live. You will thank yourself later for choosing a time when there aren't multiple other pressures happening simultaneously, like your company's busy season. Finally, track KPIs and your post-migration health. Having data to identify issues before they become hard to solve or urgent will help ensure a better experience as well as putting your mind at ease. That's everything for today, folks. I really appreciate you watching. Hopefully this information was useful. If there's anything I missed or you'd like additional details on, please feel free to leave a comment. Or if you prefer to connect with me on LinkedIn, contact details are in the description box below. And best of luck with your CRM migrations. Thank you.